The valet handed back our keys with a smile that looked rehearsed, like something he had practiced in a mirror until it no longer reached his eyes. My father checked the odometer out of habit because he always checked the odometer, and the number matched exactly what it had been when we pulled up 3 hours earlier. Not a single mile added. The car had supposedly sat in the parking garage the entire time we ate dinner and celebrated my mother's birthday with overpriced wine and a cake the restaurant forgot to bring out. But when my little brother opened the back door to climb inside, he screamed so loud that people on the street turned to stare at us. There were boot prints inside our car. Massive boot prints, size 15 at least, caked in thick black mud that had dried in ridges and patterns across the leather seats. The prints were everywhere. They covered the back seat where my brother and I always sat. They tracked across the floor mats in heavy, deliberate steps. They climbed up the back of the driver's seat as if someone had been standing on the leather, pressing their weight against the headrest, leaning forward to look at something through the windshield. The mud smelled wrong, not like regular dirt, but like something organic and rotten, like soil that had been mixed with things that used to be alive. My mother grabbed my brother and pulled him away from the car, while my father stormed back to the valet stand, demanding an explanation. The young man in the red vest looked confused at first, then concerned, then genuinely terrified when my father dragged him over to see what had been done to our vehicle. He swore he had parked it in spot 47 on the second level and had not touched it since. He swore no one else had access to the keys because they had been hanging on the board the entire evening. He swore on his mother's life that he had no idea how muddy boot prints had materialized inside a locked car that had not moved an inch. The restaurant manager came outside and his face went pale the moment he looked through the open door and saw the state of our interior. He offered to pay for professional cleaning. He offered to comp our entire meal. He offered increasingly desperate solutions while carefully avoiding the question that hung in the air like the rotten smell emanating from those dried boot prints. How did this happen? How did someone get inside a locked vehicle in a monitored parking garage and leave behind evidence of their presence without triggering a single alarm or appearing on a single camera? We demanded to see the security footage and the manager reluctantly agreed after my father threatened legal action and public reviews. He led us into a cramped back office where a wall of monitors showed grainy feeds from cameras positioned throughout the parking structure. He rewound to the moment our car arrived and we watched the valet pull into spot 47 and climb out and walk away. Then we watched 3 hours of absolutely nothing. The car sat motionless in the frame. No one approached. No one touched it. No one came within 20 feet of our vehicle during the entire duration of our dinner celebration. The footage showed an empty parking spot. It showed our car sitting exactly where it had been left. It showed the valet returning at 10:47 p.m. to retrieve the vehicle and drive it back to the entrance where we were waiting. There was no moment where someone opened the doors. There was no figure climbing inside with muddy boots. There was no explanation visible on any of the camera angles. The manager frantically cycled through while my mother cried quietly in the corner of the office. We drove home that night because we had no other choice, and calling a taxi seemed like an overreaction to what we tried to convince ourselves was a prank. My brother sat in the front between my parents while I took the back seat alone, my feet carefully avoiding the dried mud, my eyes fixed on those boot prints that seemed to tell a story I could not quite read. The prints went from the floor to the seat back, and then they stopped at the headrest as if whoever made them had simply vanished from that position. There were no prints leading back down. There were no prints showing an exit path. Just ascension, and then nothing. The smell got worse as the car warmed up, and by the time we pulled into our driveway, I had counted the boot prints 3 times and arrived at the same disturbing number each time. There were 27 individual prints visible throughout the back of the vehicle, but they all came from the same pair of boots. The same size, the same tread pattern, the same dense black mud that crumbled slightly when my father tried to scrape a sample into a plastic bag he found in the glove compartment. 27 steps taken by a single person who had somehow entered our locked car without opening the doors and then walked around inside it without ever walking out. My father told us to go inside while he examined the car more thoroughly, but I watched from my bedroom window as he circled the vehicle with a flashlight, stopping occasionally to inspect something I could not see from my vantage point. He opened the trunk and stood there for a long time without moving. He was not examining anything. He was just standing there, staring into the trunk, his flashlight being steady and unmoving as if he had forgotten how to react to whatever he was looking at. When he finally closed it, he did not come inside for another hour, and when he did, he would not look any of us in the eye. The next morning, the car was gone from the driveway. My father said he had taken it to be professionally cleaned, but when I asked which service he used, he changed the subject with a sharpness that told me not to press further. We got a rental car 3 days later, and 2 weeks after that, my father came home with a completely different vehicle, a new model and a new color with 0 miles on the odometer, and that new car smell that made my mother burst into tears for reasons she would not explain. I was 14 when this happened, and I did not learn the full truth until I was 26, and my father was dying of pancreatic cancer. He called me to his hospice room in the middle of the night and told me there were things I needed to know before he was gone, things he had kept from the family to protect us, but that someone needed to carry forward. His voice was thin and reedy, diminished by the disease that was consuming him from the inside out, but his eyes were sharp and terrified in a way I had never seen from my father before. He told me what he found in the trunk that night in the driveway. He told me about the photographs he took with his phone before he had the car towed to a junkyard and crushed into a cube of unrecognizable metal. He showed me those photographs on a phone he had kept locked in a safe deposit box for 12 years, a phone he had never used for anything else, a phone whose only purpose was to preserve evidence of the impossible thing that had manifested inside our family vehicle. The trunk had been filled with dirt, not scattered or spilled, but packed tight like the inside of a coffin, compressed earth that filled every inch of available space from the floor to the underside of the trunk lid. The dirt was the same color as the mud from the boot prints, that deep, rotten black that suggested soil which had not seen sunlight in a very long time. My father had touched it and said it was cold, colder than it should have been on a warm spring night, cold like something that had been buried deep underground where the sun never reached. There was no body in the trunk. There was only the impression of a body, the negative space where a body had been, the ghost of a shape that suggested someone or something had been lying in that grave dirt and had climbed out at some point during the evening while we sat inside the restaurant celebrating my mother's birthday. The boot prints in the back seat suddenly made terrible sense. Someone had emerged from the dirt in the trunk and had walked through the interior of our car and had stood on the back seat looking out the windshield at something. Then they had returned to the trunk and the dirt and the impression that waited for them like a bed. The boot prints started appearing inside our house 6 months after the car was destroyed. My brother found the first ones in his closet, massive muddy tracks that led from his bedroom window to the corner where he kept his toys. My mother found prints on the ceiling of the master bedroom, defying gravity, walking in a straight line from one wall to the other, as if the person who made them had been hanging upside down. I found prints inside my school locker, inside the family car that had replaced a destroyed one, inside a movie theater bathroom stall where I had gone alone during a showing that suddenly felt like a trap. We moved 3 times in 5 years, and the boot prints followed us to every new address. They appeared inside closets and cabinets and the trunks of every car we owned. They showed up in hotel rooms during vacations, in hospital rooms during my grandmother's final days, in the church where my brother got married to a woman who divorced him 6 months later after finding boot prints inside her childhood, home 4 states away from where we lived. The thing that had emerged from our trunk had not been contained by the destruction of the vehicle. It had attached itself to our family like a parasite, and it was spreading through our lives like a stain. My father spent his final months researching the history of the parking garage where our car had been that night. He hired investigators and genealogists and people who specialized in finding information that did not want to be found. What he discovered filled 3 notebooks that he passed to me on his deathbed, notebooks that I have read so many times I can recite certain passages from memory, notebooks that contain the closest thing to an explanation that any of us will ever have. The parking garage had been built in 1987 on the site of a former funeral home that had operated for nearly a century before closing under mysterious circumstances. The funeral home had been run by a family named Ashworth, who had passed the business from generation to generation until the last Ashworth, a man named Elias, had been arrested in 1986 for crimes that the newspapers of the time refused to describe in detail. The articles mentioned missing bodies. They mentioned disturbed graves. They mentioned rituals and practices that had no place in any legitimate mortuary business. Elias Ashworth had been convicted and sent to prison, where he died of unknown causes 3 months into his sentence. His body was never claimed and was buried in a potter's field on the outskirts of the city where the graves were unmarked and the dead were forgotten. The funeral home was demolished and the land was sold, and the parking garage was built on ground that had been soaked in death and grief and something else that my father's investigators could not quite name. The something else was important because it explained what Elias Ashworth had been doing in that funeral home for all those years. He had been trying to create a door between the living world and whatever lay beneath it, a passage that would allow things to move from the realm of the dead into the spaces where the living kept their possessions and their vehicles and their false sense of security. The rituals he performed required bodies and graves and dirt that had absorbed the essence of human decay. He needed that dirt to be compressed and concentrated and placed in enclosed spaces where the barrier between worlds was thin enough to tear. Spaces like coffins, spaces like trunks. The parking garage was built directly above the basement of the old funeral home, a basement that was never properly excavated and sealed. A basement that still contained the remnants of Elias Ashworth's work. The boot prints that appeared in our car had been made by something that climbed up from that basement, something that used the dirt in our trunk as a doorway, something that was looking for a family to attach itself to, because Elias Ashworth had spent his whole life trying to come back from wherever the dead go, and he needed living hosts to anchor himself to this world. My father believed that we were being followed by the ghost of Elias Ashworth, a spirit wearing boots size for a man who had been over 6.5 feet tall, according to his arrest records. I believed him for a long time because believing in ghosts was easier than accepting the alternative explanation that my own research eventually uncovered. Elias Ashworth had not been trying to bring back the dead. He had been trying to bring something through the dead, using human bodies as vessels for entities that existed in spaces between worlds, entities that wore the shapes of men but were not men, entities that left boot prints in places they should not have been able to reach. The boot prints have stopped appearing for now, but I know they will return because they always return when I start to feel safe. My brother committed suicide 3 years ago after finding prints inside his infant daughter's crib, and I cannot blame him for choosing escape over continued terror. My mother lives in a care facility where the staff has learned not to question the muddy tracks that sometimes appear on her ceiling. I live alone in an apartment with no closets and no trunk space and windows that do not open because I have done everything I can to eliminate the enclosed spaces where the dirt likes to manifest. I am writing this because my father asked me to carry the truth forward, and because I recently learned that the parking garage is being demolished to make way for new development. The construction crews have already begun excavating the ground beneath the structure, and they have found the old basement of the Ashworth Funeral Home, exactly where my father's research said it would be. They have found the jars of compressed grave dirt that Elias used in his rituals. They have found the boots he was buried in, size 15, caked in mud that never quite dried even after decades underground. The boot prints started appearing in his car 3 days later. He called me screaming about the dirt in his trunk and the smell that would not wash out, and the impressions in the soil that looked like bodies pressing upward from beneath. I told him to destroy the car. I told him to move his family. I told him to run as far and as fast as he could, because once it attaches to you, it never lets go. He stopped answering my calls after that, and when I drove past the construction site last week, I saw that work had resumed, and the basement had been fully excavated, and the ground was open like a wound that refused to heal. There are more boot prints now than there have ever been. I find them in my apartment every morning, tracking through rooms I know I locked, climbing walls I know cannot be climbed. The dirt is spreading, and the doors are opening, and the thing that Elias Ashworth spent his whole life trying to summon is finally coming through in numbers that will not be stopped by crushing cars or moving houses or any of the desperate measures my family tried for so many years. I can hear footsteps above me as I write this, heavy boots walking across a ceiling that has no room above it. The valet returned our car with 0 mileage because the journey it took did not happen in this world. The boot prints were left by something that does not need doors to enter enclosed spaces, and the dirt in the trunk was not just soil, but a doorway, a passage, a hole in reality that we accidentally brought home with us, and that has been widening ever since. If you have ever parked in a structure built on forgotten graves, check your trunk tonight. Check your backseat. Check the spaces where no one should be able to reach. because once you find the boot prints, it is already too late to run.